Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. It is such an honor to be here for the closing event of this, what has been a really remarkable day and a half. I just want to thank the Kennedy Center, the NIH, for really impelling us to do this really important thing for us. Now, I have some serious misgivings about tonight, because truthfully, I just want to go sit in the audience with you and listen to these musicians play, because they're so phenomenal. But I have a mission tonight, and the mission is that we're going to talk a little bit about science, we're going to talk a little bit about creativity, and try to understand why it is that scientists should be looking into what jazz musicians are doing. Now, I was watching Hamilton, and the ending, it's about who's going to tell your story. And so I was thinking, who's going to tell my story? I don't know, so I'm going to tell you my story. I think that when I was younger, I really felt that sound was just about the only thing that moved me. And I wasn't at the time, I didn't quite understand why that was, but sound somehow seemed important to me in a way that I couldn't understand. Obviously, people mattered, friends, family mattered more than anything, but sound was this thing that I kept kind of coming back to in my life. I had conviction in my life about music, but not about being a musician. And throughout my whole life, I grappled with this sort of tension that I felt internally like my life was consumed by music, yet I wasn't going to be a musician. I never had that artist conviction. And I don't know if I just knew I wasn't good enough to matter in music, or because I was too practical, but somehow I felt that I was not ever going to be a musician, despite loving music more than anything that I could describe. So I kind of sought a life of sound without really even knowing it by going into medicine. And so at first, my thinking was kind of simple. You go into life when you're growing up, you're thinking about life, death, love, pain, happiness, all these kind of sort of metaphysically important things. And then in the hospital, you realize that, wow, people live and die. And there's a very physical life or death aspect to that that suddenly felt right to me. And it might be that both my parents are surgeons, and somehow I had this backdrop that all of these kind of nasty magazines that were coming with guts spilling out of them into my mailbox suddenly seemed interesting and important to me. So I decided eventually to kind of dedicate my life to this. And the one thing you realize quickly as a child is that you can't see into your own ear. You can try pretty hard, but you just cannot see what's going on in there. And so I always wondered, we've got this whole auditory world, this whole auditory environment. The world seems full of sound and music seems full of meaning, yet how is it that enters our consciousness? And it seemed very strange to me that it could just be from these two little holes. And so I spent the rest of my life trying to figure out what's actually going on behind these two little holes. Now, for those of you that were here yesterday, I showed a little bit about the temporal bone. I'm going to describe this in some more detail today. So this is an amazing drawing by a guy named Max Bredel. This is a pencil drawing of the temporal bone. Now, each of you has two of these in your head, okay? One here, one here. Hopefully, they're about here and here, okay? Now, the temporal bone is the structure that allows you to hear. It also enables balance, and it's the most complicated and anatomically dense part of the body. The interesting thing about the temporal bone is that we still are just really scratching the surface of how it does something complicated. Now, sound is, in fact, energy. It's vibrational energy that goes through our ear canals, that enters our ear canals, and then vibrates the eardrum. There are three tiny hearing bones called the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. These things are so small you can barely see them if you put them in your hand. And these bones get set into motion when you hear a sound. That motion gets transferred from the air into the eardrum, through the bones, into another thing, which is the cochlea. And it's got this kind of characteristic snail shape. The cochlea is where the magic starts to happen, because inside the cochlea, vibrational energy becomes fluid vibrations, and from there it becomes electrical energy. And then the vibrations stop. There's no more acoustic energy past the cochlea. And so hearing at that point on is entirely electrical. So let's listen to what some electricity sounds like in your brains right now. Sounds good. Electricity sounds good. Now, that kind of feeling that I have when I hear music, you think about how complex it is that it goes from the ear then up to our brains and gets reassembled there as sound, is pretty amazing. And so that is what I wanted to understand with all of my science, all of my research. When I got to the field, instead, I was confronted with this. Okay? Yes. And so that sound is what really plagued me for 20 years, because every time I wanted to understand somebody's hearing, that's all I had to work with, pure tone, a sine wave. And while as the smallest kind of sound unit, the simplest sound that we can conceive of, it's a really fundamentally important basic way to add knowledge about hearing, it's very far from something like Beethoven's symphony that some of you got to hear last night. And so with this idea in mind that we could not understand hearing by looking at the ear, I started moving up towards the brain. Now, when we think about the brain, a couple of things come to mind. And when I was in medical school, one of the things you do in first year is you actually dissect a body. You have the privilege of somebody who's donated their body to science. And you actually extract the brain out, and you hold it in your hand. The first thing you realize is it's kind of heavy, but then it's kind of small. You can really cradle the whole brain just in one hand like this. And you think to yourself, every single thought that person had, every memory, every feeling, every behavior, every activity, every percept, every conscious thought is right here. And you start to realize that life feels abstract, it feels metaphysical, yet there's a very biologically rooted physical source to this that's an organ. And so even though we have this consciousness that we create to understand the world around us, we are actually bundles of neurons firing back and forth, helping us recreate this kind of matrix in our heads that enables us to make sense of the world. Now, I wanted to understand how it is that this brain can not only take input in and make sense of it, but also give input out. Because to me, as a sort of struggling jazz musician, I like nothing more than to try to improvise my own bad solos. And so, as you're improvising, and sometimes every once in a while you hit something that sounds kind of good. And you're like, wow, how did I do that? And so that process of creation, of creativity, kind of consumed me. And as I started listening to the greats, I realized that there's so much here for scientists to learn about how the brain generates a new idea. Now, there are many different kinds of creativity. Okay, I'm not trying to say that music is the only one. There's culinary creativity, art creativity, painting, architectural creativity, athletic creativity, scientific creativity. There's even surgical creativity. Now, this is my team doing a cochlear implant surgery. Let me reassure you, we limit the creativity in the OR. Okay? But without a doubt, we improvise when we need to, because things don't always go right. And sometimes there's a surprise in front of you. Now, the kind of creativity that I wanted to look at, for me, was the kind that you're going to hear about tonight from some stellar people. Now, in jazz, we talk about the jazz greats, and we talk about how the music is changing and how we don't know where the next generations of music is coming from. Well, let me tell you, tonight you are going to be really rewarded by two people who are undoubtedly going to rewrite the history of jazz moving forward. And so Vijay Iyer, I'd like to bring him onto stage, and he's going to introduce himself musically with a little improv for us. Vijay?
Thank you, Troy.
So, now I can see why I want to sit down with you guys. Dr. Vijay Iyer has a PhD in cognitive neuroscience and decided...
Sorta. We can talk about that. I'll correct a few details, but it's close.
Now, listening to you play reminds me that words are pretty bad at describing music. And sometimes I don't know that we should talk about music so much as listen to music. Now, the next musician I'd like to introduce kind of needs no introduction. Her talent is really kind of spellbinding. There's no other way to describe it. And I'd like to introduce Esperanza Spalding to the stage.
You gonna play?
Yeah, you want to do a little music intro for yourself here?
Oh, okay.
We've not rehearsed.
No, it's surely not. Wow.
Yeah.
You inspired me.
You inspired me.
Well,
Wow. So we talked about last night how music is pretty old. And so this is a fossil that may represent the first musical instrument other than the voice. Now, what's interesting about this is that it was probably carved from the bone of a bird dating back to somewhere between 35 to 40,000 years ago. Okay? So when we think about this, this says something to us about what human beings were thinking 40,000 years ago. Okay? Somehow, despite trying to have to survive, not get eaten by a lion, make fire, whatever they had to do, they wanted to make a flute. And what are they playing? What music are they playing? There's no repertoire. There's no radio. There's no sheet music. There's no teachers, as far as I know. What are they playing? The first music might have been improvised. Now, why is that important? Because when we think about the capacity for improvisation, we have to, rather than think about it as this arcane thing that happens only in rare jazz musicians, we have to think about it as a very everyday, normal biological act that allows us to be creative, to innovate, to problem solve, to make ourselves better, and to reinvent our brains in many ways. Now, the first music being improvised says to me that scientists should say this is a pretty important activity. Something that is not important usually gets weeded out somewhere, if not, maybe 4,000 years later it would have been weeded out. 40,000 years to persist. Every human history, no matter where it's been on this planet, every culture, every age, there has always been music. Humans are hardwired not only to hear music, but I believe to create music. Okay? I would like your thoughts on this idea.
Yeah. Well, so you start asking like what kind of music was it, but that's already, we're thinking in a modern framework when we say something like that. But I think we have to really examine the category that we call music, because where does it begin? What's not music? And that's...
How do you define that?
Huh?
How do you define that?
Well, I think it begins with the category of the human, actually. It begins with us accepting each other as fellow beings, as part of the same human family. It starts with empathy, in other words. And then it starts with moving together, which is, of course, not specific to humanity, right? Mm. But then the next step is being able to move in sync, move synchronously, which not many animals do, right? I mean, there's one thing to, say, swim in a school of fish, but when we, for example, walk together or clap our hands in sync or sing in unison, that capacity seems to be the beginning of what we could call music, because it's about us listening to each other in very specific ways. It's about coordinating behavior, and it's about a sort of unity, a togetherness, an intersubjectivity.
You mentioned that most animals don't synchronize. Now, in this last session, you had the privilege, some of you, of hearing Ani Patel speak, and he showed this very well-known bird that he had the opportunity to study.
Yeah, we know about that bird.
Yes, and so, if you don't believe the bone flute idea that music is old, let's take a look at this bird here.
That's right. You hadn't seen that before?
No.
I could tell by your face that you've never seen
Yeah,
that
that
before.
makes me think that it's the word music. That's all.
Yeah.
That's all that is differentiating sound that's not music from sound that is music. Because everything is making a sound. Everything is vibrating. Any creature communicates via sound. Any creature that communicates via sound is making music. I mean, we made the word music. I don't know that anything's not music. So I guess we make a choice to have our circle of concern only encompass a specific type of organized sound. But I think we've all experienced that phenomenon where you are listening to someone speak another language and you can't make sense of the individual words. So you just hear the melody and the phrasing and the emotional intention in the phrasing. And to your point, maybe we have been communicating via sound since before we had the concept of music is its own category aside from sounds.
Yeah, and without anthropomorphizing this bird too much, I can't help but to think that this bird is funking out to the beat. I mean, this bird seems to enjoy what's going on. Right now, that's projecting a lot of our own thoughts about music onto that bird, but it's hard to really interpret it in too many other ways. I mean, and Ani, maybe you can enlighten us later on. Now, earlier...
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I know that one of the points he's made about this bird and other species that can move to music is that vocal learning is part of its cognitive development, that's an attribute that species has. But I think what's also clear about it is that this bird is able to move at that tempo. I mean, if that song were 10 times as fast or 1/10 as fast, then none of us could move to it, right? I mean, it'd be just way outside of the physical range of possibility. So that's part of it too, is that there's some kind of harmonic convergence of frequencies that are inherent to the body. I guess if you look at the physics of it, there's like what would you call it, a moment of inertia? There's like a torsional frequency that emerges from like just the body of the bird, right? And that can only be in a certain range because of the physics of its body. And I think we're like that too, that our arms and our limbs, our legs move at certain tempos. Our heart moves, beats at a certain tempo. We breathe at a certain tempo. We speak at a certain tempo. And I think those are all the tempos that we associate with music.
Yeah, I don't think it's any coincidence that our music grew to reflect the rhythms that are inherent in our biology. Earlier we met for about 15 minutes before we came on stage, and I actually had to stop us from talking because we were using all of our good material. And one of the things that came up is this idea that there are many other activities out there that are very analogous or in some ways evocative of what a jazz improviser does. And so
Everything that's happening right now,
Everything.
the fact that I just interrupted you is jazz.
felt good, liked it.
When you were standing up there speaking something that you may have prepared, you were improvising with your hands, and you're improvising with your head, and you're improvising with your intonation, and you probably added some sentences for effect that you didn't practice before.
And we were accompanying you back here.
We were comping for you.
We were.
This is my one and only, first and last gig with the great Esperanza Spalding and Vijay Iyer.
This is the first, but probably not the last.
Never say never.
Now, we got a math. Let's all just quickly do this math problem in our heads. Okay. So, now what's unique about this? Now the answer is D, okay? If we all took the time out to look at this problem, we would all figure out that their answer is D. Okay? And in fact, there's only one correct answer to this problem in the universe. Okay? There's only one solution.
In the Euclidean universe.
Okay.
Yes, in this universe, as long as we understand the laws of quantum physics. And so, now let's take the task at hand that accompanies somebody when they're playing the tune, Take 5. And the improviser's goal is to create a new melody, solo, rhythmic harmony to this song using this general guideline. Now, what's different about this as a sort of cognitive problem set? One problem is that there's no correct solution. There's infinite number of possible solutions, and every single person in the world would come up with a different solution if they had to do this, no matter how many times they had to do it. Think about that in terms of the generative capacity of the brain. If every single human being on Earth improvised a solo to this, it would be different. Every time. Now, I'd like your thoughts on that, because you guys have to play again and again. And I want to know whether or not you ever feel that you are caricaturizing yourselves, falling into patterns, licks, habits, tendencies, and how that affects your thinking when your goal is to generate something new, but the fact that you're human gets in the way.
No. Being human doesn't get in the way.
No.
Being human, what? Well, then we're damned. I mean, the beauty of improvisation is a container that's safe to be as human as you possibly can. Mm-hmm. So you can be ugly, you can be rude, you can be kind, you can be sinister, you can be destructive, you can be meddling, you can be celebratory, you can be suffering, you can be lame, you can be unprepared, you can do anything. And the point is there's a mutual agreement that we are all going to co-create something that is beautiful no matter what happens, or not even beautiful. It can be not beautiful. The only agreement is we're all going to co-create here. So nothing can get in the way. That is the state in which you're trying to create from. Yeah. So all of the worrying about patterns, or like, oh, I've done that 100 times, I'm not going to do it 101 times. All of that happens before you start improvising. That's like your practice. And the practice is to make more room. So like a caricature of yourself, I think, most improvisers would think, is just like a barrier. Because it means every time I get to this kind of chord, I can't get past this thing I always play. Because that's the best I can do. So the practice is to expand that boundary a little bit. So I'm not left with just this caricature, I can do more. So the practice is like expanding the container, and you expand it with language and with facility and with harmonic references and harmonic palettes that you can paint from. But once you hit go in the improv department, you're challenged to undo all your processing faculty. You're trusting something else, which is a place from which you create, and it's your total humanity. That's the prerequisite.
You know, you place this imperative of newness on the situation, but that's not actually what it is. It's about, it's not about creating something that's new, it's about creating something that's true. It's that simple, actually. And so then, that doesn't make it easy, but it's simple. I mean, what that means is that you just have to be, it's partly about just accepting what happens. And it's also about listening, because, you know, there's also this, you framed it as like, basically as what do you do as a soloist? But one of the main things that you do when you're playing with other people is you listen, right? And soloing involves listening too. It involves relating and coordinating, like I said, and giving way to one another, synchronizing, building together. You know, so that's actually what's happening.
How do you define your concept of what true means musically?
Well, all I mean is, I guess maybe a better word even than true is honest.
Okay.
Actually, there's, I think you were going to show something about Coltrane and giant steps.
Yeah, I will.
But if you check out I think we even talked about this last time we were on a panel together. But if you check out the outtakes to giant steps, there's a few seconds of audio where he's talking to the band, and he says, he's having trouble with it, actually. And he said, Coltrane says to his band members, you know, I don't think I'm going to improve this. I'm just trying to make the changes. I'm not telling those stories. And then someone else in the band says, you know, if you make the changes, that'll tell them a story.
That being said, you can still be a truly, honestly terrible musician.
And that's allowed.
That is allowed.
That's allowed. That's okay. And guess what? You have to be part of the time. Otherwise, you won't know that you have to get better. I mean, I'm telling the truth.
Yeah.
I'm being honest.
That is true. That's honest.
So there's another part of, I think you mentioned acceptance. That is it's not a prerequisite, but I think that's a fundamental part of the process of expanding your improvisational skill, is being willing to face what actually is in your playing and in what's happening. What might come back is like, oh, damn, I sound sad right now. Let me try to do better the second chorus. That could happen. You only come to that understanding if you're really listening to yourself, though. And that requires acceptance. I think one of the challenges in improvising is actually listening to yourself as an individual while you hear your place in a entity larger than yourself. And I think as long as you are listening and doing, you'll be honest. And, you know, to be fair, you know when you're being honest. You know full well. That's probably quantifiable in terms of what's happening in the brain.
And you know what else? Other people also know when you're being honest.
It's like you're like, do you like these shoes? and you know if you're like, they're cool. and it's look, how scary would it be to tell a friend or loved one, like, I don't like those. I think they're ugly because A, B, C, D, and E. Sorry. Now, in an improvisational context, thank you. That's what you're asked to do. That's what you're asked to do. But again, we're co-creating. The mission is co-creating. So if somebody said that to me, I'd be like, well, you know, I think they're fly because, and then use what they just said to me. Yeah, maybe they're light and they get dirty, but without the dirt, how do you know what the light really is? Without the dark, how do you know what the light is? I'm just trying to scuff it up so I can get some void on my feet,
Yes.
or whatever. So, and that comes back to the acceptance thing, because sometimes you get on the bandstand and you are sad. Mm-hmm. You are sad. Whatever reason, things are in the way, it's not your instrument, and what comes out is not what you want. But you're asking for the truth from the people on the stage with you. And sometimes the truth is, I can't really bring it right now, so we're going to co-create and have as long as it's moving, as long as we're co-creating in real time, we are improvising. If the mission is improvising, mission accomplished, as long as you keep creating. And you know when you tell the truth. But it's hard to be in that state because realistically, we're not honest most of the time.
And this is why the science of improvisation is challenging.
It is. Well, this is
They be lying.
See, I'm a guy who kind of keeps dismantling categories, which makes me, I'm not sure if it makes me, that's why I'm not really a scientist, and why I had to modify the category you put me in of cognitive neuroscience, because I wasn't really interested in definitively answering questions. I was actually interested more in revealing the problems inherent in some of the questions we ask,
Wow.
And like when we talk about improvisation, as you said earlier, when we talk about improvisation as this rarefied thing that only a select few great musicians are able to pull off, the fact is that we're all improvising all the time. We've been improvising since in utero. Wow. There's never a time when you're not.
But let me point out that most scientists would probably say that what they're doing is looking for the truth about this world. And so maybe you're not so far from a scientist as you might think.
Maybe.
Now, take that. No. Now,
Perry,
for those of you that, obviously the music you just heard is probably sufficient to convince you that something that's improvised on the spot doesn't have to be simple and doesn't have to lack sophistication. We just referenced John Coltrane. This is an animation of a very famous recording called Giant Steps. And this is one of the first recordings that when I was in college, listening to it, 100 times, made me realize I should never be a musician, and made me also realize that there's something going on here that is worth studying. He'll state the melody first, and then he'll start to improvise. Melody twice. So that's the brain improvising at work, and one of the greatest musicians to ever have lived. Now, in order to convert what you hear on stage here into science, you have to have some basic assumptions. And the assumption that I start out with one is that artistic creativity is a neurologic product. Agree?
But that sort of locates it all up here.
I'm going to go with you, though, because we're jamming. So,
Okay.
for the, yeah.
Well, okay, but let's...
Well, I'm going to play on the offbeats.
Let's go. Syncopated.
The brain is in the body. Not just in it, but it's integrated into the entire system of the body. So that's what my dissertation was about.
I know.
was the role the role of the body in music making and music perception, music cognition. And we have a way of, we tend, when we have these conversations that are framed as music and the brain, as kind of re-embraining it and forgetting that it's embodied too. So that's my only qualification.
And a
to what you were saying.
neurological process doesn't have to just be in the brain.
Right, that's what I'm
You just want to
basically
clarify it's not
clarifying.
just in the brain.
That's right.
Wait, but
And maybe it's not even just in the body.
are we agreeing that the brain controls the body?
The brain what?
Are we agreeing that the brain controls the body?
Control.
Control. We're afraid of control.
See, there's a lot of assumptions that we have to make here, and this is why it's hard to do this.
Or
So,
is it responding to the input coming in through the other faculties of the body?
Is the
Is
brain
it
a mediator
responding?
of the senses and the actions?
so there might be a certain amount of philosophy here that we'll never get past. But I really like the idea that even something like this shows how far apart scientists and artists can be, honestly. And this is something that I have felt. So in my science, the thing that I regret the most is that I'm taking something that is art and I'm trying to apply a reductionist scientific approach that employs control over variables as a necessary means to make progress. It bothers me. And so there's this idea of what we call, it bothers me, yeah.
I like to say something.
Yes.
For all that cool woo-woo stuff we just said, honestly, that's what we're all doing.
Yeah.
That solo just there is a perfect example of reducing the options that are available in every moment to try to concentrate the focus so that it moves it forward.
Okay.
I mean, it's the same thing. And again, when we're talking about improvisation, there are different branches. There are different branches. So I think we were referring to a more free-form mode of improvisation. And a lot of what we were speaking about applies to when you're really playing the changes, which is the equivalent of creating assumptions.
Okay.
And saying we all agree to these basic laws. These are the basic scale tones that are available here, 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 and here. Based on those truths, what can you discover? But
Okay.
as you showed earlier, there are multiple right answers.
Then let me say this. The brain is a necessary ingredient to create art.
Boom.
Sure.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, I'll take that.
And everybody has one. I'll agree with you on that one too.
I usually believe that. Lately, I've wondered.
Yes, yes.
Now, sorry. Now, if artistic creativity is a product of the brain,
Okay.
partially a product of the brain, we should be able to study it the way we study any other complex biological activity. Okay, now, we need this, okay? We need the ability to look inside your head while you are doing whatever it is you're doing, okay?
So is it just, can we just talk about the fact that, is that a woman that he's doing that to?
Are you talking about on the right or
Yeah.
the left?
They're both wearing long robes. Just
Actually,
address
let's consider them genderless for a
Okay.
moment. Yes. However, we want to...
There is a sort of longing in that gaze, though.
I'm
That
gonna
doesn't
move
say
on.
anything about gender. It's
Sorry,
just-
Charles, sorry.
No.
You're solo, you're
Actually, I
solo.
never knew that this slide would actually cause conversation. So, we want to be able to look inside your brains real time. Now, what do we do in the modern scientific world? We use functional MRI. Okay. Now, this is one method of many, but probably the best at looking at a complicated activity because you can do any biological activity pretty much that you normally do in this scanner as long as you comply with a few rules. Number one, it's very small, okay? You are not fitting a tuba in there and jamming on it, okay? It's a big magnet. You cannot go in there with metal that is magnetic. You'll die because the magnet will suck in the metal and crush you. So there are other rules in there, which is that functional MRI is not really just taking an anatomic picture of your brain and how it looks, okay? What it's doing is taking a picture of how it behaves, okay? Bold imaging is the term, blood oxygen level dependent imaging. This is a way to extract information about your brain's biology by the principle that the active brain consumes blood at a higher rate than the inactive brain, and the consumption of blood is converting oxyhemoglobin to deoxyhemoglobin, which happens to be detectable by a magnet. such as an MRI machine. And then you get, in the end, a statistical cluster of activity, such as you see on the right, not an anatomic rendering on the left. Okay? So fMRI kind of looks like what you see on the right. So now, this brings up this question of jazz in an fMRI scanner. And now, without insulting you too much, I decided to start with the blues, okay? Because the blues is sort of the basic nuts and bolts of what most working jazz musicians have often started with. And so I said, well, what is an ecologically valid, normal biological activity for a jazz musician that I can convert into an experiment? And so let's write a blues for them that they've never heard before, so they won't have any associations like, oh, I played this at my wedding, whatever it is. And they're going to memorize it. It's called magnetism, and they're going to play it and then solo on it. Okay? And this is a video showing how that's done.
So this is a plastic MIDI piano keyboard that we use for the jazz experiments, and it's a 35-key keyboard that is designed to fit both inside the scanner, be magnetically safe, have minimal interference that would contribute to any artifact, and have this cushion so that it can rest on the player's legs while they're lying down in the scanner playing on their back. And it works like this. This doesn't actually produce any sound. It sends out what's called a MIDI signal, or a musical instrument digital interface, through these wires into the box of the computer, which then trigger high-quality piano samples like this.
So now I'm going to demo it here. These are double mirrors that my hands are flipped right side up. I've got electrostatic earbuds in. And now I'm going to play some memorized music. And this is improvised right here.
All right now.
Yeah.
We heard you. That was you.
That was
him.
So we did this experiment. We brought jazz musicians to the NIH and we looked at their brain activity. And this is what we had them do. So we had them either do something memorized, something overlearned, or we had them improvise. And the improvisations that were recorded in the scanner were actually not bad. Okay, so this is a recording. This is done in the scanner. Improvised. No, I have seriously heard this solo now like 800 times. Yeah. And I still like it. And so, considering that this was recorded in an fMRI scanner on that plastic piano keyboard that has 35 keys, not bad. And so, we looked at their brain activity and we saw the following things. Now, this is slices, okay? So, slices of brain activity. And it says, hey, we're going to zoom down the head kind of like this, almost like a loaf of bread, and look which parts of the brain are active and whether or not they're hot spots or whether they're cold spots. And we can also look at the actual activity as a sort of graph, a hemodynamic response function graph, and say, hey, and if you look at this point in space in the brain, it did this during the course of the solo, or it did this during the course of the solo, or whatever it might be. And then you can convert all of that into a pretty picture that looks something like this, that says that when we are improvising, at least in a solo context, the prefrontal cortex of the brain is shutting itself off in large part. This is the part of the brain that is involved in conscious self-monitoring. It's the part of the brain that censors you when you're about to make an error. Now, what does this suggest? It suggests exactly what the two of you, I think, started out talking about, which is that you are trying to clear the space away, in a way, get out of your own way so that you can create. I'd like your thoughts on that.
Wow. I just think, wouldn't it be such a treat to have a safe space where you could find out what you really think and feel? Good, bad, ugly, friendly, beautiful. In a place where it would be received and given back to you, beautified. I think of it like the few times you've absentmindedly slipped up and said something inappropriate. And your friend's like, oh, actually that's not okay to say. Let me tell you why. It's received compassionately. And it's transformed by the compassion and creativity of the other person, and they play it back for you and help you understand what's just come out of you and how it relates to the world around you. And inversely, or on the other hand, you might say something really profound and beautiful when you're not thinking. And someone hears it and says, oh my God, Vijay, that was so deep.
Happens all the time.
And then he says, really? And you're like, yeah, man, because blah, 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 blah. And I think the practice of improv is a practice of trusting that it's okay to do that, it's safe to do that you're in safe company that encourages truth, exposition, self-exploration, and communication in a way that it will be, like I said, received and given back to you and put in a larger context, and you can do the same for others. And when you're walking around inhibiting yourself all day long, A, you don't find out the depth of your beauty and capacity, and B, you don't find out the stupid stuff that you have absent-mindedly absorbed and repeat.
So that combination of ideas that you said is really interesting, because in the brain, I pointed out first the shutdown of the prefrontal cortex, but actually there's something that's activated in red, and it's at the bottom there, the medial prefrontal activation. This is a part of the brain right here in the middle. Like if you kind of point smack in the center of your forehead, right at the front, this part of the brain is an autobiographical part of the brain. If you tell a story about yourself, this part of your brain is active. If you hear a song that reminds you of summer in 6th grade, this part of your brain is active. And so in a solo improvisation context, what's happening, at least in these expert musicians that we're playing, is this self-monitoring area shutting itself off, this self-expressive autobiographical area is turning itself on. When we think about improvisation as sort of telling your musical story, it might start to make some sense biologically.
Yeah. It's sort of like when they say, you know, you're getting ready for a job interview or a date or something, and they just say, oh, your friends just say, oh, just relax and be yourself. But that's basically what you're saying, right? Because those are also improvisative moments.
And then you're like, but I hate myself. And it's like,
but then you learn to not just accept, but find, you know, the other thing that happens, well, you were saying that sometimes you blurt something out that you didn't think you meant to say, or sometimes you're cornered and something comes out of you that it's kind of like you're in survival mode, you know, like, oh my, I need to act. And I've had moments like that on stage, and I'm sure you have too, and that's when you hear something, you're like, wait, who played that? You know, that wasn't me. But then it was, and then you learn something about you. Something is revealed in that process. And that's your story too, you know.
can I ask a very basic question? How often do you like your playing?
How often?
Do you generally like what you're playing?
Well, I'd say that
You should. I'm not saying you shouldn't.
Vijay, tell the truth.
at every moment there's something wrong with it and something right with it. At every moment.
That's a nice
So that's
escape.
basically the way that, you know, in the sense like, and usually what I find that might be right about it is more relational, in the sense like, well, at least I landed at the same time as the drummer.
Do you feel the same way?
No, I don't feel the same way. I feel differently, and I don't think about it. I just think about what other people might think, because I can't do any better than that right then. Like I swear, like I'm really giving my best.
Yeah.
So I know I'm going to keep practicing, it's going to change, but honestly, for being honest about it in this improvisational context, I'm really just worried about the other people. Like Vijay and you are like, oh God, I hope this is doing something, you know, because self-expression and all that is wonderful, but ultimately you're hoping for complicity. You know, that whole thing, why do you want to tell a story? Because you want complicity. You want somebody else to receive what happened in your life. That's important to you, and know that it's understood, or at least paid attention to for a moment. So I think more than like, oh my God, was that good? Oh, that was stupid. It's you're performing, you're building narrative in real time, doing your absolute best, and in a way, more than I think going like, is this cool? I'm trying to sense the complicity. I'm trying to gauge like how much it's activating the
Yeah.
attention of the people in my midst,
Yes.
because it's communication. So
Right.
if you're not getting down what I'm saying, something's got to change.
Yeah. You know, you put it in you framed it in a sort of aesthetic term when you said you like your playing. Like is a kind of like a weak aesthetic. Like you would click like on something, but that doesn't mean much, right? But to like your playing versus to believe in it, right?
Wow.
You know, because you're talking about decisions at every level, right? The macro level of like, is this reaching everybody in the room? And literally every body in the room, right? Those are the questions.
Sometimes you just zone out and you be like, well, just watch us perform, deal with it. Like, that's your problem. We're doing our thing. You get to witness. I mean, sometimes that's...
Well, that happens.
that
I remember
happens.
actually when you were at Banff and we tried this stunt of putting you in the pub, basically. You played a set out there, and these were for like locals in rural Alberta. So they weren't really like, oh my God, Esperanza Spalding is playing. They were like, oh, there's a band playing. Anyway, so so they weren't quite with you, and you found a way to not just power through it, but rise above it, and still deliver a message, as I recall.
Cool.
And we've all been in situations like that too, where it's like, well, how do you play for people who actually aren't here to listen? How do you reach them?
But if hearing isn't just through your olfactory senses, sorry if that's not how you call it.
Auditory?
Auditory. Yum. If hearing could be a broader neurological experience,
Yes.
then in a way it doesn't matter if they're aware or not that what you're playing is entering their system, because
Right.
vibrationally it is,
It is.
whether they're active or passive, right?
Yeah,
So they're still a part, and they're still affecting the improvisation.
they are.
So if we're improvisers, kind of doesn't matter.
But it kind of, see, like, I think that I know that you can hear people listening,
Yeah,
because it's audible.
that's very zen.
It's true though,
very
because we can
meta.
hear them listening, we can hear them responding and breathing with us, taking a moment when we take a moment, or filling in a moment when we take a moment. That's, and that actually affects how we make each choice, the
Yeah.
next thing to say or do.
Probably.
And I think that's happening when we play. It's definitely happening when we make
It's
music.
happening right now.
Yeah.
It's happening right now.
One thing I'm realizing is we have about 10 hours of material to discuss. So I want to talk a little about some of these constraints. Okay, now emotion is one of the big constraints or real reasons why music may exist. And so I want to invite you to improvise for us. In fact, how about this? Esperanza,
Yeah,
do you see that face up there?
yeah,
Can you give us a short improv based on that face?
sure. On the bass.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, we'd like to hear it. Yeah.
I can't tell if it's a stank face or a sad face.
I would say sad, more than stank.
But you don't know what she's looking at.
She's looking at She's looking at Facebook.
Oh, it's right here too.
Sad
Poor
sounds
thing,
pretty good
poor
like that.
thing.
Yeah.
Oh,
Vijay, can I invite you to play a little bit on this face?
Oh. Okay.
I warmed her up for you. I'm the opening act. Now she's ready to. She's really excited now.
Yes.
I know you're a doctor, as well as a researcher in the field of neuroscience.
That's true.
So part of your mission, part of your work, part of your artistry is helping people heal, right? I would be curious to know what you think the applications of your research could be in terms of healing. What are you hoping to discover and prove, and how might it apply to our everyday lives as a healing tool?
Okay. So, thank you.
Wait, we get to ask him
Yeah.
questions?
Yeah.
Well, that's a complicated question. So, in my hospital life, it's actually pretty concrete what I'm trying to do on a day-to-day basis, because I'm trying to help people who can't hear again. There's a very concrete element to it. Somebody who's deaf and trying to get them to hear music again using a surgical device. Now, the research, especially the research on creativity, has a much larger and in some ways a little bit more of a kind of nebulous, concrete goal. But to me, it's the following. Improvisation, music making, is a very socially bonding and personally transformative experience. And we don't understand why it is the case, or how it is the case, and how we should take that experience that some people get to experience and transfer it to people that have never had that experience. I do believe that through this research, eventually, and it might be 20, 30, 40, 50 years, maybe well past my lifetime, that we're going to know how to take human creativity and apply it in new ways that are more everyday. And so it won't just be in the realm of the artist, the artistic genius that gets to have this kind of feeling, that we could make ordinary human beings more creative on a very everyday level. Now, if we could accomplish that, let's say we could make our society 10% more creative. I think the world would be a just phenomenally better place. Yeah. Now, the reason why I put you through this exercise is because it turns out that the brain reacts to these constraints and targets such as emotion in an important way. So if there was actually a third face, which is not showing up, but looks like this, okay? And so this face is more neutral. Now, if you take all of these faces and you have musicians improvise to these emotional targets in the scanner, now there's no labels, just faces, and you actually look at the brain activity, turns out that the emotional target or context changes the kind of prefrontal cortex activity that you have. Okay? Now, what does that mean? It means that the story is just not that simple. It's not like, oh, I'm creative, brains off, you know, da-da-da-da. That is not the case, okay? In fact, what it shows is that we barely understand anything at all. Okay? And so, if there is...
Thank you, good night.
Yes. If there is one take-home point from this, it's, honestly, from my perspective, it's that I want you to understand that this could all be wrong. However, it has some small chance of having a kernel of truth in it. And bit by bit, you know, science is in layers. You add little nuggets of information over years, and you aggregate them, and bit by bit, your picture gets truer and truer. That's what's going to happen here. This happens to be one of the first studies of jazz improvisation. We just don't know that much about it. Eventually, we'll have a working model that makes some sense. What this is telling me, though, is that creativity is affected by many, many things, whether it's mood or emotion or being solo or playing with another person. And we need to understand all those parameters and how they affect the brain activity, because it just can't be so simple that a portion of your brain is shut off. Okay? That may be a fundamental aspect of it, but I would be dumbing down the artistic process significantly if I tried to say, well, that's the whole story. Okay? I will never believe that it's the whole story. I liken functional MRI to the following. There's a house, a great big mansion, and I want to know what the lives of the people are like that live inside it. But all I have is 1 square inch of basement window to look through, okay? And so I'm staring through this window, and every once in a while I get a little glimmer of insight. Say, oh, there's like 3 people here, and there's like, you know, one's a man, two's a man, and then bit by bit you get more information. That's kind of like where functional MRI is compared to what it means to be alive or to be an artist or to be a musician. And so we're trying to say a lot from very little. On the other hand, it's better than not having that window. And so right now, there is no better technique for complex cognitive musical behaviors than functional MRI that I'm aware of. One day there will be. We're just not there yet. Now, all of this work raises many, many questions. And to me, the question that I think I've always found most fascinating about music is this concept that we have of music being the universal language. And I think that most people have an intuitive idea of what that means. It's that, you know, yeah, of course, music's the universal language. But let's actually explore that a little bit further. And what is language very good at? It's really good at specific propositional thought, okay? Like, Vijay, I'd like you to meet me for lunch today at noon, okay? Perfect, we both know, you know? Now, let's say I wanted to ask him that with my saxophone.
It'd be easier if I could meet you tomorrow at noon.
So good point, yes. We don't know how to time travel yet. Okay,
but I'll work with you.
Yes, but now, so let's say I wanted to ask you to meet me tomorrow at noon by playing my saxophone. Okay? I could play for 15 years, and you're not showing up at noon. Okay? You had no idea what my music, the universal language, was trying to tell you. Okay? Now, what does that mean? It means that music is very bad at communicating specific propositional thought. In fact, it can't do it at all, because fundamentally, music is abstract. Okay? It's not even clear what music means ever. Now, that's an important point, but let's think about this. What we heard last night, as some of you heard last night, Beethoven's Fifth, da-da-da-da, so famous, so iconic. What does that mean? It means nothing other than what you want it to mean or what it feels to you to mean. There's no objective meaning to it that's correct. There's no interpretation that's really incorrect. There's no way to use words to describe the meaning that's better than just hearing the phrase itself.
But that's a particular perspective on what music is. I mean, West African drumming has these traditions that are where rhythms are derived from proverbs that actually do have literal meaning and figurative meaning, but they're words. And that could be taught and learned. And it could be that you had a rhythm that you could play that said, meet me at lunch tomorrow at noon.
But you would have had to have learned that.
Right.
Yeah, so
Right.
you couldn't port that rhythm over to New York City and have all these people flock into your restaurant at noon.
Yes, but if you were speaking Yoruba right now, I'd have the same problem, which is that I wouldn't know that you were saying, meet me at noon.
So maybe we're saying that music, and neither music nor language, is universal.
Well, I guess I'd put it, is language not music?
Is language not music? That's going to take a whole nother conference. I would say that language is not music.
You'd say the language is
I
not
would
music.
say that there are aspects of language that are musical, but I would say that language is not equivalent to music.
Do you mean that it's completely, that it's more than, or that's less than, or that's
No.
that it's separate from?
No. I'm making no value judgments.
Okay.
I'm just saying that
Would you
this
say that-
conversation we're having is not music.
But why?
It's interesting. It's not music, though.
Why isn't it? I mean, let me say how it is, okay?
Okay.
Which is that when I take, for example, pause and you say, okay, that's rhythm.
Mhm.
And it's quite well synchronized.
I agree that there are musical elements that form a part of how language works.
And there's a melody that emerges in the way that you talk, and when I challenge you, your voice gets higher, for example.
That's it?
And
I don't know what you're talking about, Vijay.
and so there's pitch information that I am responding to and harmonizing with.
Yes. Now,
So anyway, I mean,
okay,
we could
well-
say that language does things that what we call music doesn't do, but that doesn't mean that music could never do that, I
okay,
guess.
good. And then maybe what we're getting to is that spoken language is different than the written language, which is different than other aspects of language. So let's say this. Texting is probably not music. Okay? Now, where am I going with this?
I'm sorry I interrupted.
No. So we should explore this idea of how music can be a universal language. And how can we do that? Because musicians that improvise often have musical conversations. And so I would like the two of you to have a musical conversation.
Ay.
We were texting just the other day about zombies.
Yes, we were. And I thought it was a jam.
It was.
Maybe it wasn't musical, but we were jamming.
When you text, it probably sounds good.
Musical conversation, right?
Let me say, I had no idea what you guys were talking about.
Bunch of lies. I was lying the whole time.
Well, I just hope someone shows up for lunch tomorrow at noon. Yeah. So, wow, awesome. So, if we do a pseudo version of that in the scanner, we do the following. We take two musicians, and we have them have a musical exchange while one is in the scanner and another person is in the control room. They're going to do trading fours in the scanner. Now, I recruited my friend Mike Pope, who happened to live near Johns Hopkins where I was doing a lot of this work, and he came with me to do this experiment, which I'll show you right now. And now I'm going to set him up in the scanner here.
Nothing's in your pockets, right, Mike?
No, nothing's in my pocket.
Okay.
Those are electrostatic earphones. That's the non-ferromagnetic piano keyboard. So now you'll see his legs sticking out of the scanner up there in the TV screen. So he's playing now. Now he's listening. Now he's going to respond. And I'm laughing because he quoted.
He's trying to cut you.
Yeah,
This is a pretty good representation of what it's like. And it's good that it's not too quick. You know, the fact that we do it over and over again lets you acclimate, you know, to your surroundings. So the hardest thing for me was the kinesthetic thing, you know, of just, you know, looking at my hands through two mirrors, laying on my back, and not able to move at all except my right hand. You know, that was challenging. But again, you know, it was there were moments for sure. You know, I mean, there were moments of real, honest to God musical interplay for sure. So.
Now, if we take a look at every note that was played, we can look at it like a musicologist does it and say, oh, there were all of these different musical behaviors that took place. And we can also look at it statistically and say, if we look at the melodic expectancy, the memorized condition was pretty expected. The improvised condition was unpredictable, however, statistically correlated with what came before and after, because there was listening going on, there was interaction going on, just like you just heard. Their playing was statistically correlated with one another, even though it was unpredictable. Now, if we look at the brain activity, it starts to get really interesting, because during this wordless musical conversation, traditional perisylvian language areas are highly active. Okay? So what I'm saying is,
The what now?
now in the brain, sorry, in the brain when you speak, there's these areas that have classically been identified to be active: Broca's area, Wernicke's area, auditory cortex. These areas of the brain are showing up during this musical-only conversation. Okay? So when we think about why music might be the universal language, part of the reason may be because we use our language areas of the brain to have this musical conversation. However, there's a blue part, that corner there, a little mark that says AG. That's the angular gyrus. This part of the brain is deactivated during this musical conversation. One, not the only, but one of the key principal acts of this area is for semantic cognition. Things to give meaning to words and vocabulary. This part of the brain is not involved in this musical communication. So maybe part of the way that music can achieve this sort of universal language-like quality is by suspending with the need for semantics and going straight to the source of these communication areas.
Wow.
And that might be a part of why we can say that music is a universal language.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So cool.
Now, in our last few minutes, I just want to probe one small topic here, which is what is genius? Now, genius is an overused word, hard to define, maybe impossible to define, yet you kind of know it when you see it. Like, I kind of look at you two, and I think you two are geniuses, okay? Now, it's kind of how you look to me, okay? Now, I want to show you a girl. Now, this girl is 8, and let's watch her play piano. she was kind of a genius when she was 8. Now, she grew up to be a very, very famous piano player by the name of Gabriella Montero. Now, Gabriella Montero is in the classical tradition, known as someone who will improvise half of her concerts. And here she is improvising on Jingle Bells.
So this is a little Jingle Bells.
Yeah, so she's pretty amazing. Now, one day...
Can I, before you go continue, I'm sorry. No, that was fantastic, but here's an experience I had once. I taught a course at NYU in the Performance Studies department, which is not a music department. They don't self-identify as musicians or anything. And so I thought, oh, this is my chance to show them and talk about musical improvisation with people who are just coming from outside of it. So I played a video of Monk, and I said, this is Monk improvising. And it's like this performance that's very dear to my heart of him playing Lulu's Back in Town. You can see this on YouTube. It's live in Oslo, I believe, from the 60s with his quartet. And, it's one of these, for me, this like jaw-dropping, heart-stopping, kind of like hair-raising performance. Then when we got to the end of it, one of the students said, okay, so, if you hadn't told me, I wouldn't know that he was improvising. Mm. So I guess I'm gonna, for me, that just kind of like, what? I was like, but I guess I could put the same question to you. In this case, what about it announces itself as an improvisation?
Well, I have no idea. But...
Or you could even ask, like, how do you know?
Well, let me tell you how I know. Because she emailed me and asked me... Oops.
Yeah, but can she be objective? I'm just kidding. Anyway.
I'm going to try to go back here. Sorry. So, one day she emailed me and said, could you scan my brain? And I said, yes, come over. And so she came over to the lab. And in fact, she can improvise all day long. It's like turning on a fountain. She describes it like you turn the water on your faucet and you just start playing. She could go for hours. It just keeps going. And so we brought her to the lab. Sorry, let me try to restart this. So here she was getting practice, and then we put her in the scanner. We had her basically do minuet in G as a control condition, and then improvise. And so this is minuet in G, but let me just skip past this.
Improvise.
At her brain activity, And we compared the functional connectivity of our brain. Let me explain this concept. When your brain, there's multiple parts of your brain. When you're doing something, these parts of your brain can either be in coherence or they can be not in coherence to varying degrees. Her brain, when she's improvising, is in far greater coherence with itself than when she's not improvising. Okay? So what does this mean? This means that the creative brain, the improvising brain, is deeply engaged with itself. It's in tune with itself. And this, I think, says something very important about the idea of creativity and why it's an important activity for us to include in our schools and for us to not eliminate it from an education of a child. That's right. What should be self-evident but seems not to be for some reason, creativity is an important aspect of how the brain works. It's unique. It's a very, very powerful form of the brain engaging with itself to come up with a novel idea. Now, I don't know that we can call her a genius, but she seems pretty close in my mind, and maybe one way to think about it is that her brain was better able to get into coherence with itself since she was really, really little. And so I've been trying to follow up on that and say, well, what if we had an 8-year-old who seemed like they were a genius? What could we do? Well, we could put them in a brain scanner. Okay? This girl is 10 at the time, and we could have her do an experiment where even if you don't know how to play piano, you can do this, because it's a black key only experiment. And all you have to do is improvise on the black keys. There's no wrong notes, one note at a time.
Listen, then improvise.
Now, this is work that I've begun with music therapist Ed Roth. And we've just started. We don't have any real data to show you yet. The biggest confound? Braces. Turns out that a lot of kids want straight teeth and can't actually get into the scanner without our MRI showing major artifacts. So we're looking for children to do this experiment. One day we will have an idea of what it means to be a creative child and how that changes over your life as you acquire expertise or if you don't acquire expertise. So to summarize, we can now measure the creative brain in action. Musical improvisation is a fantastic model for the neural correlates of creativity. Not the only one, but a really good one. The prefrontal cortex, if you had to pick one area of the brain as your creative area to look at and to examine to understand further, that would be the target. Overall, the creative brain exhibits greater internal connectivity or coherence with itself than the memorizing brain. And then we have a lot to learn. Now, before I ask Vijay and Esperanza to take it out for us, these are the things that I've been thinking about lately. What do I want to move ahead? How do we tell if something is good or bad in terms of creativity? You know, for example, if we make you more creative, how can we tell that your output was in fact better? How does creativity change over the course of your lifespan from when you're born to when you're an adult to when you are aging? And does actually engaging in creative activities improve your aging process? Can it stave off the deleterious effects of aging? Can we make brains better? Okay, that's what I really want to do. I want to come up with a pill that's a creativity pill that's not that different than a cup of coffee you take to be a little bit more productive, except this is your creativity drink, okay? And you take it and suddenly you are more creative than you were 10 minutes ago, okay? It's not so far-fetched once we understand the neurobiology of
You don't
this.
need drugs for that.
Yes. And then how do we fund research on neuroaesthetics? And that's one of the real reasons why we've gathered here is because we need to have resources to do this work. We've got fascinating questions, fascinating people. We just don't have the means to kind of take it home and give you guys some information that you can use in your lives just yet. And so I have people to thank, funding agencies, the NIH, the Kennedy Center, all of these people in my lab that have done all of this work with me, absolutely awesome group of people, and then fantastic scientists that have inspired me along the way or collaborated with me along the way. and then amazing artists that I've had the chance to work with. And I would ask these two amazing artists to take it out for us. And thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really don't think you need a drug to get the brain up to a higher level of creativity. My 2 cents.
Yeah.
Or a
Really,
pill.
all you need is an opportunity,
All
right?
you need is love, man.
Have you done brain scans with people in love? No, that's something.
Okay. How long do we have?
Not that long, but that's okay. right, let's hear it for Vijay Iyer.
Esperanza Spalding.
Esperanza Spalding.
Charles, live. Go, Charles. Go, Charles.
Thank you, everybody, for a great night. Have a great evening. Hey.